Nimisha Parma from Leicester. Hi, Nimisha. Thank you for joining us. Sai Shruti from Chennai. Eager to attend the session. Thank you, Sai, for joining us. Really appreciate it. We've had Rakshita from India. Excited to hear this session by Swarnamalya. Thank you, Rakshita. We're very excited too. I think we've been so blessed to have such a plethora of experts within the Indian classical dancing field. So we've had Namaste Didi from Priti. Hi, Priti. We've had Subhatra Vijay Kumar from Canada. Looking forward to this session. Thank you. Thank you. And it's great to have this level of interaction, because this is what actually allows us to understand whether we're doing the right thing, and to, to sort of, well, basically to gain that interaction, to gain the interest. So we've had Shakti, have I pronounced that correctly? Sakti Devendran. Hello, ma'am. Namaste. I'm Sakti from Chennai, eagerly waiting for this session. Just to say, we will be starting the session. We're just waiting for a few more people so that I can do the introductions in one go. We've had Arti Balasubramanian. Hi, I'm Arti from India. Looking forward to this session. Thank you, Arti. Really lovely that you could join us today. We're just going to wait for a few more and then we will start the session. So please keep the comments coming in. It's great to see, to be able to say hello to you all as well, and to see where in the world you are watching us from. So we've got Smritika from Chennai. She is one of Swarnamalya Ji's students. So excited for this session. We've got Nivedita from Mauritius. Looking forward to the enriching session. Thank you, and I hope everything is well in Mauritius. And for all of you, from wherever in the world, I hope you're all staying safe and healthy. And let's hope that there is some light at the end of the tunnel for this pandemic we're all surviving or living through. So thank you. Keep the comments coming in. It's great to be able to say hello to you all. So we've had Nirmaya from Coimbatore. I'm sorry. Please forgive my pronunciation. It's the English in me. Looking forward to the session. Thank you. We'll just give it a couple of minutes and then we will start the session, because I know that everybody is very eager to hear Dr. Swarnamalya Ganesh speak. And it's such an interesting topic area as well. So we've had a few more people joining us. So yeah, please, like I said, those who have just joined us, please in the comment section, please let us know where you're watching us from, where you've joined us from. Like I said, I'll go into the whole housekeeping of today's session shortly. So Namaste. This is so we've got Srimati from Coimbatore. Have I pronounced that correctly? Please forgive me if I haven't. So it's really lovely. Okay, I'm assuming you, Ajish, you said yes, I'm pronouncing it correctly. Thank you. Please do feel free to correct me if I am pronouncing it, incorrectly. Okay, so I think what we'll do is we're going to start getting people coming in. We've got Sarah, who's joined us from Melton Mowbray. Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Sarah is also one of CICD's board members. So thank you for joining us. Okay. So today's session, let's make a start on it, because we've had a few more people joining us. So we've got Sudha from Chennai, and you are Dr. Swarnamalya's student as well. So thank you. It's really heartwarming that so many of her students are joining us for this session. We really do appreciate it. And these sessions we wouldn't be able to run them without our esteemed speakers, but also without you, the attendees. So thank you so much for taking time out to join us today. So today we're going to start. So welcome, good afternoon. Today is the 1st of July. Wow, the time has flown this year. So we've had Padmasani, she's also Swarnamalya student from Chennai. Thank you and welcome. So yeah, the 1st of July, we're now in month 7 of 2021, and this year we are celebrating CICD's 40th anniversary, 40 years of bringing Indian classical dance to the UK, and more specifically Leicestershire, which is in the middle of the UK. So when you look at a map of the UK, Leicestershire is literally in the middle of it, so it's known as the Midlands. So Nirja Doshi, just to say, we haven't started yet. Dr. Swarnamalya is going to be joining us shortly. Her camera is off at the moment, but I'm just doing an introduction. Yes, the webinar has started. Talisha, people are saying they can't hear anything. Is anybody else having difficulties hearing us? It might be, Nirja, that you might have to log off and log back on again. It could just be a connection. It could be a connection on your part. Okay, so today's topic is on the timeless dance traditions of the Devadasis in South Indian classical dance. Hi, Swarnamalya. And we're talking about them from past to future with our esteemed guest, Dr. Swarnamalya Ganesh. Dr. Ganesh will be examining the past and present statues of the Devadasis of South India. She is a dancer, a dance historian, a professor of dance history, a choreographer, and artistic director of Ranga Mandira School of Performing Arts. As a performer, she has performed widely throughout India, including at the prestigious Visakha Music Academy, the Narada Gana Sabha, and other leading national forums. She has toured solo dance programs and dance ballets to countries such as the USA, here in Europe, the Middle East, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, and Mauritius, to name a few. Academically, she is engaged in the documentation of rare and invaluable dance forms once practiced by the Devadasis. It's known as hereditary performers and communities in South India. She has established a successful annual art festival called Arts by, for, and of the rural communities. It is a unique model in India in which urban and rural arts are given a common forum for display and dialogue. We're really honoured that Swarnamalya has joined us today to talk and share her priceless knowledge with us all. So Swarnamalya, namaste and welcome. And I will now hand over to you. Before we go on, just to let the attendees know, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box where you've been telling us your name, and we will go through them at the end of the seminar. You will also, at the end of the seminar, once we all log off, you will be receiving an email from us with sorry, my brain cell has just completely died on me, with a feedback form, just to fill in, just to let us know how we've done, a questionnaire feedback form. And if you could just fill that in and send this back to us, this allows us to make sure that we're bringing you the right information in the way that you would need. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Swarnamalya. Thank you so much and welcome. Thank you.
Very good afternoon and good evening to all of you from different parts of the world for connecting with us. I want to begin by thanking Nilima ji, who is a pioneer and a legend in the UK. It's an honor to be here in celebration of CICD's 40th anniversary. And it's such a wonderful gathering that she's brought so many artists and so many art lovers together. I also wish to thank and acknowledge Nidhi ji for her generous introduction, and Talisha, who's on the tech support, who's been anchoring all of this with me. And I want to welcome all of you to this afternoon's webinar. I'm saying afternoon because a lot of people here are on the UK time, but it is quarter past, no, it's 7:45 here actually in India. So a good evening to all of you there. Timeless traditions of dance of the Devadasis. That is indeed the topic that we have chosen today. Just allow me a moment to open my presentation so that all of us can see it. Yes. I want to begin by saying that this presentation this afternoon is by no means an exhaustive one. As you know, the time we have is rather limited and the topic is a very vast one. So it's going to be a brush, you know, with some of the important and interesting moments that one can hold on and take back with you, with yourself. But it by no means is it exhaustive. So if you have a lot of questions, it's meant to leave you and you know, sort of yearn with a yearning to ask a lot more questions, both to me as well as to yourself in the future. Timeless dance traditions of Devadasis, past to future. I'm rereading that title because the title has a significance, and we'll come to that shortly. I just want you to take a quick look at her. She is indeed from a temple in South India called Koneri Rajapuram. On the ceiling painting outside in the outer prahara of the temple. So she was perhaps painted there somewhere in the late 18th, early 19th century. And this is only one half of the painting. The other half of the painting is where there are British officers standing in front of her. And this is a Sadar procession or a Sadar dance procession. For those of you who are new to the term Sadar, Bharatanatyam was, at least between the 18th, 19th and 20th centuries, known as Sadar up until 1950s, when the name was very willingly and consciously given up for many reasons, cultural, political, so on and so forth. And the name Bharatanatyam became more popular. But Sadar in essence is the precursor, is the subaltern, is the form of dance that Bharatanatyam is. So I will be referring to Bharatanatyam and Sadar interchangeably this afternoon, but I'll tell you when it is Bharatanatyam and when it is Sadar very specifically. So she is a Devadasi. We don't know her name because her name is not inscribed, but behind her are many other women, perhaps waiting to perform because they are clad just like her. I mean, every aspect, every nuance of her costume to her stance, all of this, you know, has been studied in depth. I wear such costumes today. We have my own practice and that of my students. What I teach, I have realigned it and called it Sadar again, in a way to acknowledge the history of this indigenous form, of the people, of the voices and bodies of people who have transported this art all the way even to people like me, who were traditionally far removed because this was a hereditary art practiced by a certain community. Timelessness and past to future. Now, if you had noticed this title a little closely, you would have seen that there is perhaps an oxymoron there. Timelessness and the idea of time, past to future, right? So there are both of these things are simultaneously there. And your first question to me would have been, but why? Right? If something is timeless, how can it move between past, present, and future? And if something was moving, in fact, what is this timelessness? So I just want to explain to you, and this will be the basis on which we will base everything that we sort of try and understand today. Timelessness is often portrayed as if it is sort of attuned to this sort of temporal awareness, quite other than that of what is practiced in the mainstream. This is where we have to understand Bharatanatyam from Sadar, right? Or Sadar and the past performing traditions or the past performing practices versus what is today considered as mainstream, what is today considered as classical, what is today considered as Bharatanatyam, right? So this temporal spacing of this and the otherness, right? Which is Sadar, which is the past. So we all love to invoke the past, right? As classical dancers, as traditional artists, we always say, you know, this is how they did it in the past. This is how it was 500 years ago. This is how it was 2000 years ago. And we show and tell. We also trace a lineage to it, calling it tradition, but we also other it by saying that this was how it was done, but now we have innovated it. This is how we have recreated it. This is how it has rebirthed itself. So this othering with a temporal spacing is something that that is not present in this timelessness, and that's why I call it timeless, because it's seamless. There is no other, right? This temporal space is one. There is one plane, and in this one plane, there is this art. It's tumbling through many centuries, right? I won't go into which century did it come to. We will sort of, you know, sort of go to those places, but you know, there is, you know, to call it a 2000-year-old art or a 2500-year-old art, believe me, is still a limiting timeline. That being said, I don't mean to suggest that what today we have has been unchanged for 2,500 years, right? So we have to understand that this is like a rolling stone. It's a stone that's been rolling through several time periods, but it's been rolling nevertheless. So this timelessness is that this temporal space is one. But it's also past to future. It is also timed in that sense, because there is a past and there is a future, which is why I've called it past to future. And you may wonder, look, if there is past, if there's future, what about the present? This present, right? This every present, that is every single day, every single dancer, every single practitioner of every single day's practice, that is determined by every image of the past. Right? So you will not be able to practice this art on an everyday basis, right? It's not a question of reading a textbook, right? You are practicing this art on your body. Your body is in the present. If you're 10 years old, you're 10 years old. Tomorrow you'll be 10 years and 1 day old. You will still be practicing the art on a different body, because that's 10 years and 1 day old, right? So this body is so present, and in this present body, this images of the past are being embedded every single day. And this past, which is embedded in the present, is like a telescope. So if you view it, what you see is the future. So if you practice for 10 days, you know that the 11th and the 15th and the 20th day, you might arrive somewhere else, right? You will arrive somewhere else because your body is changing. Your mind is changing. So the past and the present and the future are in this sort of, imagine a vestibule, right? Like a train with a lot of sort of links, right? These are all linkages. You are necessarily moving through them, as is the art form. So there is timelessness because you're moving in one direction, and there is still these compartments of the past, present, and future. Why are we all as dancers and artists interested in the art? Because we are the present. It is through us that we can imagine the past, and it is through us that we can telescope towards the future. So now I'll take you back into time, right? Let's time travel a little bit. Sangam period, which is anywhere between the second, third century BC to the second, third, fourth century AD. Now we call it the Sangam period in Tamil Nadu because a corpus of beautiful literature was penned by many poets around these periods. And they all fell under a certain genre of poetry and music and social setting that allowed for them to, through their poetry, record the social, cultural, geographical, flora, fauna, life, and context of the Tamil country. And I'm not calling it Tamil Nadu, which is a state that was birthed after India's independence. I'm calling it Tamil country, which is a much larger expanse, right? So people in this Tamil country, and the literature that came out of that Tamil country is the Sangam, and we call it the Sangam period because literatures were written in that period, but it also denoted the period before that. So, you know, we are talking several thousands of years before. There were two communities, there were several communities, there were two communities called the Panar and Viraliyar. Now, Panar and Viraliyar are very interesting because they are semi-nomadic bards and songstresses. They move between certain areas. They would move along usually with either the clan leader or the king or whoever was considered as sort of the head of that particular community. And remember, that many thousands of years ago, the formations of society as we understand today, right, were not still fully formed. So there was a clan leader, and they would follow the clan leader into either small sort of war zones where they would fight with another community for space, for food, for any kind of reason. Right? So these Panar and Viraliyar, they were singing, but what were they singing and dancing? They would sing and dance about the war. It was like a documentation. They would sing and dance about the victories that happened, or if there was a defeat, they would come back and pep up the war heroes. They would document meticulously the life and lifestyle and the love and loss of the communities with which they were traveling. So they were perhaps one of the earliest, the Viraliyar, who are the women songstresses, were perhaps the earliest reference we have to the ideas of women who were singers and dancers. I've said Sangam to now because I'm sort of rolling through time here in this one slide, right? So from Panar Viraliyar, you will come to the Chola period, and you will see names, and these are names you would have heard them often, and there are several more. Like I said, nothing about today is exhaustive. Talicheri Pendigal, because they were living in the Talicheri, which is the temple complex. Devar Adiyal, because she was Deva's Adiyal, as in the one who was serving the Deva. So God's servant. So she was Devar Adiyal, a very honorific term indeed. Padiyilar, the one who did not have a husband, meaning she did not take a husband. She was wedded to the idea of the central deity of the village or the central deity of the kingdom, right? Manikam, because Manikam is a gem, literally an emerald or a ruby, and she was called Manikam because she was the jewel of that particular kingdom. So all of these Devadasi women were given names. For example, you will have Tangachi Manikam or Venkatadri Manikam. So it was an honorific. Nitya Sumangali, of course, because she did not take a husband, a mortal husband, she could never be widowed, right? In a society that was fast moving into feudal world, where these sort of patriarchal norms of marriage and widowhood were strongly prescribed to all other women, she remained ever auspicious, right? So she was Nitya Sumangali. And then you move to a period, interestingly, the term Devadasi is a very late term. You see the term Devadasi inscribed in inscriptions very, very, very late. And you see the name Devadasi feature more in British records later on in the colonial times rather than in copper plates or on the temple walls. Right, so Devadasi, and she becomes a Notch girl because Nach in the north became Notch for the British, and Notch girl became sort of a common umbrella term to bring under it women of all classes, women of all distinctions as dancing women. Whether they were dancing in the courts as Rajadasis or dancing in the temples as Devadasis or dancing in other places as other artists, all of these bifurcations, all of these nuanced, categorizations was all broken down to umbrella them under this sort of colonial oriental gaze, which is called the Nautch girls. So really our understanding of Devadasi and her timeless art is only from the Nautch period. And then comes another period, which is post-independence, which is one of the saddest eras for this timeless art, which the Devaradial term becomes Devadiya, which is a pejorative in Tamil, which literally means a prostitute. So look where we've come from, right? And this is by no means a chronology. I'm just trying to sort of bring you through a period just by looking at the terminology that was employed. All of these are terminologies that were employed, to denote her specific roles. And look where we've come from Viraliyar, from Talicheri Pentigal, from Devaradiyar, we've come all the way to a prostitute, right? So we will now roll back in time to Jeshta. She's a deity, very well known in mythology. She is the elder sister of Lakshmi, goddess Lakshmi, who is the goddess of abundance and wealth. But Jeshta is often looked at as the sinister sister. Even though she's elder, she's sinister because she is not as beautiful as Lakshmi. She is not wedded to the most powerful Hindu pantheon god Vishnu. She is she's got a son and daughter who are seated next to her, but just let's observe her. She's got a pot belly. She's seated. She's not as beautiful. So Jeshta, for many, even though she's in worship and she's considered as a very giving goddess, in many, many cultures over time has been shunned as the sinister other. However, Tamil Sangam period talks about Jeshta and how from the cult of Jeshta, we're not even talking about temples because temples were not there during this time. From the cult of Jeshta emerged a Tunangayan Kuttu. Now, these are all terms, if you're not able to pronounce, do not worry. I know several of you are from different parts of the world. But Tunangai and Kuttu is literally dance in Tamil, is a savage dance that is supposed to invoke a sense of valor induced by delirium. So you will see the dancer making a lot of twirls. Those of you who have learned and who continue to learn Kathak will start relating to the idea of twirling right from here, right? And if you're asking me, but why? This is in the south, that's in the north. Wait until I finish, right? So there is delirium and a state of trance that is sometimes also induced by intoxication. Now what we'll do is I'm going to unshare this and I'm going to show you a little clip of Tunangayan Kuttu, which I had performed. It was a full-length show for Krishnagana Sabha way back, but I'm just going to, just so I can pique your interest. Remember, music and dance were not in the form that we understand it today, as in ragam and talam and tunes and all of that. So I just want you to observe the kind of music, the kind of dance, and the kind of cult dance. This is perhaps where, and I can't promise that this is exactly how it was, but I reconstructed it based on the text and the various contexts that were available historically for us. Right. So if you found that grotesque and somewhat unappealing, that's because, my friend, you have not been used to seeing art you are not used to seeing art in the form that it might have been consumed by people of the past. Right? So we can't assume that they were all doing music and dance the same way that we do today. So it is not an unchanging tradition. Tradition is a changing rolling stone. right? So now we'll continue tracing. So from Tunangayan Kuthu, so as I told you, Viraliyar or the Virali was a very early understanding or imagery of the Devadasi. However, Tunangai is even earlier to her. So this Tunangai Enkudha, which is a very sort of I can't call it rustic, it's a very wild, unformulated form that would have been part of different cults in very many different ways, got a bit institutionalized when the Viraliyar featured herself as a poetess, as a songstress, as someone who would sing about situations that were part of courtly traditions, that were part of king and his love life and his war life, right? So she too, moved from this sort of savage dance and sort of created the first codification, because you still get the poems of Viraliyars, right? So from Viraliyar, from this sort of 3rd, 4th century, you come to the 5th century AD, right? So it's still very early, which is still the Sangam period. You have a Tamil epic, which is called Silapadigaram, that gets written. In Silapadigaram, though, one of the central protagonists, Madhavi, is a court dancer. She dances in the court of Karigal Solan, one of the early Cholas, and she is awarded the title Talai Koli, which is one of the honorifics given to temple or state dancers, right? So the idea of temple hadn't still come. So the idea of a state dancer evolved much earlier, right? So now what I want to do though is again break you free from that PPT and show you a short excerpt of Madhavi's dance from Silapadigaram as reconstructed by me for one of my productions based on the entire Tamil epic Silapadigaram. I will show you just an excerpt of how, and the set, and take notice of the set, costume, all of that, which were all done based on the text itself. I wonder what's happening. You're not able to see the video, aren't you? I don't know what's happening here. All right, we won't. I don't know. Let's not waste time looking at that because we have, yeah, it looks green, right? Okay, I'll come back to that video in the end, I promise, if I can, right? I don't know. I looked at it earlier, but that's technology, right? It can be your best friend and it cannot. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation here and hope that the rest of it works. So following Silapadigaram, now I'm taking you through a chronology because that's the easiest way to sort of roll through time, right? And still enjoy the timelessness. Now we'll come to the Holy Grail period. I call it the Holy Grail period because any dancer worth their salt, when you ask them in South, especially in Tamil country, what is this period that was the glorious period of dance, would say Chola, because there were over 408 dancers who were attached to the temple of Rajaraja. Those of you who are part of CICD seminars earlier might have heard about the 108 Karanas that were etched in the Rajaraja's temple in Tanjavur, and the glory that was bestowed upon artists by this time who were very well codified, who had not just codified dance forms, dance traditions, but also life, lifestyle, do's, don'ts, society, community, caste order, all of this very well sort of etched, right? So we must understand that simultaneously when the art was evolving, so also society and communities. So right from early tribal to early feudal to feudal and by now imperial world, we have this sort of complete codification of dance and dancers. What did they dance though? Today, because we see the 108 Karana panels and we have connected that to the Natya Shastra directly, which is not written in the Tamil country, we have been able to identify that perhaps the 108 Karanas were known and in vogue in the Tamil country at this time, in the 9th century, 9th, 10th centuries. However, we have no record of what was actually performed, right? We don't even get the songs, we don't get any documentation other than the 108, in fact, the 88 Karanas from Tanjavur, of that period. Nothing else is available for us copiously to understand what exactly they danced. So did they dance to only Karanas? Did they do only to Sanskritic songs and thematics? Were they performing to Tamil? There are many, many different people who have different opinions. But truth is, all of us are only intellectually guessing this because there are no records or documentation. So what were the compositions, contexts is anybody's intelligent guess. But something very transformative happened in this time. The dancing god and the dancing human became the double heads of a drum, if I can use that metaphor. The dancing god being Shiva, the one who is etched as performing the 108 Karanas, the one who is understood as the primordial cosmic dancer, because Shaivism and Bhakti movement had been like roaring in the south, starting from the 3rd, 4th centuries. And in the 9th century, it was at its pinnacle. So Shiva and Shaivism, and Shiva as the Nataraja, as the dancing god, was etched not only in the walls, but also in the minds of generations of people, in the cultural memory of people. Simultaneously, the 408 dancers, the women who were practitioners, who were performing, who were mortalizing this dance, were the dancing humans, the flesh, the blood, and the sweat that was humanizing this art, this present, what is past to us, but they're present, right? You can't say that this period was glorious to dance because you see walls full of sculptures or the gods dancing in your imagination and poetry. It's because humans danced, and sculptures like these give away for us this human endeavor where women are performing dance and women are playing percussion. And it's a long panel which I've cut here just for our benefit, but you have women playing music and going in a procession and celebrating this dancing god through the dancing human. And Tevarams were compositions that would tell us copious notes, give us copious notes about the dancing human. Coastal regions of India had an influx of travelers even at this time. Even before this time, even in the Sangam period, you have a tremendous meet of cultures. Shonaka, I've just put a few names here of the kinds of people who were frittering through the Indian coast. Shonaka, meaning the Arabs from the Middle East. Habdis, who were Africans who were coming from different parts of the world, right? The coast became sort of this transit hub for people who are coming from Red Sea and going towards West Asia, people who are bringing spices and people who are bringing Silk Route was slightly up north, but this was the spice route, the southern coast, right? And West Asians, of course, Chinese, and we still have a huge Chinese community down south who have lived here for many, many, many generations, right? Mongolians, because we had people who were coming to the north. Of course, I'm talking about Mongolians and Turco-Afghani was a slightly later period, right? Medieval period. But nevertheless, the cultural meet was as early as Indian history itself, right? So you see so many cultures. So the dance and the dancing human could not have missed this meeting, could not have excluded themselves from this meeting and sat in isolation. That's the first point I'd like to make. Why is this timeless? Because it's also borderless. Now I'll take you to a very, very interesting moment. I've dragged you from here, from somewhere in the 10th century, closer to the 14th, 13th, 14th century, right after the great Sangeeta Ratnakara was written, right? And Sangeeta Ratnakara and the Natya Shastra and all these treatises are touted as sort of the primordial texts on which Indian music and dance have birthed. True, but they were not consumed in all parts of India as Sangeeta Ratnakara and as Natya Shastra. They were consumed, no doubt. That's why I said we don't have what was used for Rajaraja to create the 108 Karanas. We don't have it. It's lost. Hopefully someday it'll re-emerge, right? We're all looking. But here is, I'm just showing you one leaf from a manuscript called Jawahar al-Mustaqi-e Muhammadi, right? This is a translation in Dhakkani in 14th century in Andhra Pradesh. of the Sangeeta Ratnakara. And here is a beautiful painted folio, and this is in Dhakkani written here. It is, and here it says this is Ad Sanj. Ad Sanj is nothing but a Samyuta Hasta, right? So here the instructor, the dance master, is not a Hindu. He is wearing a beautiful Turco-Afghani Angraka. His cap is certainly Persian because, of course, the cap is flying, but he's holding a stick in his hand, unmistakable for a dance teacher. And he is also holding a mudra in his hand, right? This is a mudra. Right, we all recognize this as dancers, and the dancer is not in she's not standing, this is not Mughal influence in the north. This is south, this is Andhra Pradesh. She is wearing a beautiful short skirt and a pajama, and her legs are in Tehi, or what we call as Agratala Sanchara in Natya Shastra, but also called as Kudittu Mette in Tamil, right? So she is dancing clearly a South Indian dance. Her costumes don't denote her to be North Indian. He is teaching her, he is instructing her, and this is from the South. So all of this to say that we are not just timeless, we were borderless in some ways, and we were meeting many cultures, and we were giving and feeding off of them. And that is a point that allows this rolling stone to continue rolling, right? Otherwise it might have stopped somewhere. Now we'll talk a little bit about the codex. I just told you it's Sangeeta Ratnakara. Those were Persian Dhakkani verses that you saw, and the entire text is Sufi infused. So you have a Sufi poem, and then you have the passages from the Ratnakara. It's a brilliant work. So now, because I'm in a gathering of course, Indian classical dancers, but also a lot of Kathak dancers, and in honor of Nilimaji, I want to talk about one of my research pieces, which is Jakkini. Right? Out of the 34, 35 dance forms that I was blessed to reconstruct of the Nayaka period, which is the 17th, 18th century, the one that speaks to the world from my heart is Jakkini. Now, Jakkini, Jakkadi, Jhankini are all many terms. The Yavana connection, and Yavana here is the Persian. The Persian connection is unmistakable. I will not have the time because this one slide is by itself an entire presentation. So I will not be able to take you through the nitty-gritties of Jakkini, but I can tell you this, that the Lakshana or the text of Jakkini and the various Karnataka sources and the Sanskritic and the Persian sources and the Dhakkani sources, all of them point to a beautiful dance form that was practiced in all of South with the use of Brahmari and with the use of Sufi text and with the use of Persian and Arabic in the composition. And this was in the repertoire of the tradition of what we today call as Bharatanatyam, or what was called as Sadir. And this is a Tirukkurungudi temple, 17th century wall painting. I mean, not wall painting, it's a sculpture where I've just added it here because you see an entire retinue of Arab travelers coming in with their camels and horses and their chests full of all kinds of goods, but they're also bringing musicians. They're musicians and music instruments along with them. So no travel was devoid of the artist. So therefore, artists met, cultures met, and people met. If you want more evidence for Jakkini, I found it in a 6x6 wall painting at Ramalinga Vilasam Palace, where a Hindu king, the Setupati of Ramnad, was seated in a throne, clearly with a dancer wearing an andhraka and Amir looking, an Arab looking or a Persian looking dance master. And if you wanted to make the distinction, here is the South Indian clad women, and here is this dancer who's holding one hand up and the other down, as part of Jakkini. Now, because I spoke a little bit about Jakkini, I haven't even touched about the technique of Jakkini. Pardon me, we don't have the time. I will quickly only show you, a trailer of Jakkini, if you will allow me, because I think that's a very interesting thing for you to watch. I will show it to you, and we can move on then. Right, it's just a trailer. I'll show you only a small part of it. Well, I'm going to cut short that as well. I think that's another presentation in itself. Just the idea that Jakhini is interspersed with so many languages, a codex that will take you back to not just Sanskritic texts like Nartana Nirnaya, but also to Persian texts and to Dakhini texts, and bring the pedagogy of what today is considered Kathak and what today is considered Bharatanatyam. Bring these pedagogies together through this sort of this idea of Sufi tradition. So that is a whole other talk, but just to sort of glimpse us through with Jakhini, that was. So Jakhini was one. There is more, lots more actually. In my reconstruction, I mean, of course, Jakhini always takes the cake because people are fascinated, but there are so many other dances, and I've only mentioned some 5-6 here. Gondhali, if you'd like to watch Gondhali, we can. There is, of course, Dandarasaka, that is a spelling error, Mukhachali, Perani, Navapada, which is a lot of compositions of even people like Kshetraya, who are very famous composers. Their padas, Darusani, which is another tradition even today prevalent in the Andhra traditions of Vilasini Natyam, and also performed only in Sadhya, not in Bharatanatyam anymore. Vasanta Kelika, lost forever, reconstructed. Shiva Leela, when I reconstructed, was such a strange dance even for Bharatanatyam dancers to eschew. But when I told them that this was performed just 300 years before and that we've completely obscured it, they were fascinated, right? So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to show you a short clipping of Gondhali, only because I want you to see the flavor of different dances that were part of this timeless tradition that we call what? I wonder why that is. All right. I think there's some issue with the, I just tried doing everything, but. So I mean, these are all repertoires of their own. I want to highlight here the fact that these are not compositions, right? So it's not as if you will take one evening and you will perform all of these pieces at one go. It can't be done. It can be done, but by different dancers, right? Because each of these come from a different context with a different set of sensibilities and performers who are experts. So there are many records that we have of how an evening in the court entailed the performance of so many of these, but by different artists over time. And so each of them would perform these pieces in the presence of the king or in the presence of different connoisseurs, but they were doing it only in this sort of understanding that these were multiple cultures, multicultures that were all forming the part of a whole, right? So I just want to take us back quickly to that presentation. I'm sorry, I'm sort of in and out, but I just thought you'd like to see some dancing in between. So I mean, I have, we can talk about each one of these for days on end, right? Pedagogy, music, dance, repertoire. How did we come up? How did we arrive at the costumes? How did we understand the context? It took me 8 years to even understand what were the many forms that we have lost. What was the timelessness, and how have we timed the art, right? By codifying it in such a strict nation state manner, we have lost so much of our tradition. So what we're holding on to is really the sort of remnants, and that is based on, oh, I belong to South India, I belong to Tamil Nadu, so I'm dancing Bharatanatyam. I belong to Andhra Pradesh, so I'm dancing Kuchipudi. I'm belonging to North, so I will be performing only Kathak. So I think this idea that dance belongs to states, different dances belong to different states, is a myth, right? Yes, they were codified and they were part of different regional cultures, but we are also refusing to acknowledge regional cultures, right? So the fact that Bharatanatyam evolved not just from Natya Shastra, not just from Sangeeta Ratnakara, not just from Venkatamaki's Chaturdandi Prakashika, but also from Jawahari Mustaki, right? Also from texts of Marathi origin, of Gondhala, of Shivalila, of Darusani, right? Of Telugu texts. Now, those are all important elements that we need to, somebody like, what is his name? Pandarika Vittala, who wrote Nartana Nirnaya, traveled from Karnataka. He belonged to Karnataka, the coastal regions of Karnataka, Maharashtra. He traveled from there to the south. He moved through the Tamil country all the way to the court of Akbar. And his text richly documents not just his understanding of what he believes is Margi, but what are these rich Deshi traditions that form the very basis upon which this idea of the Margi evolves, right? So those are all big discussions. I won't burden you in such a short time with all this. So now we'll come back to her, the Sadar artist. So now we've moved from the 17th, 18th centuries, which was still Jakkini and Perani and Gondali and all of that. We don't have we have some names of artists who performed at that time, like Bhagirathi and Chandrarekha and Muthuparni and all that, but we don't have their paintings, photographs, sculptures, etc., right? Not as identifiable documentation. But what we have visually is this dancer and many like her who belong to the late 18th, early 19th and 20th centuries, as I told you, where they were still performing, not just now, you see that cultural meet that had the Mongolians, that had the West Asians, that had the Arabs, that had all of these Turco-Afghani people, and, because of which birthed Jakkini and Perani, all of these delightful forms. Now, newer delightful forms were added. So like I said, the rolling stone was rolling, and now they rolled into European influence. They rolled into Dutch influence, Danish influence, French influence, the English influence, of course, right? So that's why this dancer, is wearing this beautiful, this is a muslin. As you can see, her pajamas are striped, right? So this muslin stripe is typically from Masulipattnam in the coastal Andhra region, that fabric. And she's wearing a nice, beautiful silk drape and a green blouse and all of that. Like I said, the other half of this painting is a bunch of stiffly uniformed British officers standing inside the temple, taking the honor of being the chief guest or the sabhapati for a sadar performance inside a temple or a community. Right. Now I want to bring in, I told you multicultural. I spoke to you about the Rolling Stone. I spoke to you about timelessness. But I want to bring to this mix another very important word, cosmopolitan. And I always use this word and I always try and qualify it, because cosmopolitan today means many things, right? Cosmopolitan today is considered as avant-garde, is considered as fashionable, is considered as sort of this willing mix, conscious mix of many things that we think is even unholy. But cosmopolitanism, as we understand from from these late medieval, early modern periods, is an understanding where the dancer and the dance, right, truly become a citizen of the world. Today, we all speak Nilimaji. You will understand what it meant to pack your bags from India, travel overseas, go somewhere else, and really speak to an audience who had no understanding of your culture or your art, and sort of start afresh, right? Start afresh and talk to them about an art form and believe in yourself that they would enjoy and they would find relevance to this art. Now, you will be happy to know that you are not alone in doing this, right? There were so many who traveled back and forth between this country and the rest of the world through boats and ships and all kinds of modes of communication. And even as they stayed continuously for the rest of their life in small, tiny villages, Sadar was so cosmopolitan and such a vital aspect of human existence, art itself, but Sadar in particular, that even if you're sitting in, say, Pudukkottai or Viralimalai, you would consider yourself psychologically and emotionally and in the way you culturally as a citizen of the world. How cool is that, right? You would consider your art now as a part of this universal sort of understanding of what they wanted to achieve as universal peace. Remember, all the kings were all the time fighting for power to unseat and usurp each other. But culturally, they were very keen on giving and taking from each other, whether it was Mughals to the South Indian, the Rayas, Vijayanagaras, or the Vijayanagara kings to the sultanates who were here in the south, or the sultanates to the, Syrian kings who were sitting somewhere, or the Iranians who were elsewhere, or the Portuguese who were coming and the Portugal king and, the British. So all of these people were looking for this global culture. And the artists, particularly dancers and their dance, became the front runner to parade this global peace or this global citizenry, right? And they evolved themselves as constant travelers, willing to travel. And travel did not mean just going from India to America, but it meant stepping out of Pudukkottai and going all the way to Ramanathapuram. That still was travel, because people never did that, right? So they were willing to move between courts. They were willing to go from a Muslim court to a Hindu court for patronage. They were willing to go from a Mughal court to a Sultanate's court for patronage. They were willing to shift their art. They were willing to assimilate, learn, adopt, and re-give, right? And they believed that they were happy to learn, acquire knowledge of different cultures. Right? And I'm not saying all of this as just paying rich encomiums or compliments. There are material evidences to prove every one of this statement. Trust me, only because we don't have the time, I'm not taking you through that. But believe me, if you have questions, like I said, you will be left with a lot of questions. I hope you will be, because this is something that we all must take pride in, that, we are forever citizens of this universe, right? And they enjoyed this difference. Today we celebrate difference. We culturally, we say, oh, we are celebrating difference this particular day. This is International Day of whatever. But a cultural seed was implanted in generations before us. And perhaps that's why we're all able to do it more effortlessly today, right? With a little help, of course, right? And this comfort of living next to each other. Right? You will see that in records, Bharatanatyam dancers or Sadar artists were always living with other Hindustani artists. The South had a profusion, and Nilima ji brought this up in her, sort of informal conversation we had before the session began, we had a profusion of Tawaids, we had a profusion of Hindustani dancers, as they were called, right? We had a profusion of the Kanchanis who were migrating here from even from the courts of Wazid Ali Shah all the way to the courts of the Nawab here, and some of them proliferated to the Tanjore court, right? So they were all comfortable living with one another. They were, of course, until the Suez Canal was built, women from other countries did not travel into India, so we did not have a profusion of women of other world cultures come in, but the cultures traveled through the people, through the men, which is why it's largely patriarchal. But that's another conversation for us. All this to say that their attitudes were willing to see life as pleasure, willing to see life as curiosity, and with an interest. So the art was birthed from a place of interest, curiosity, and pleasure. If it is so, why won't it be timeless? Why won't it hold the test of time? Right? What you have created out of that in the post-independence era is but a mere, just a handful, not even a handful, a morsel, right? If that is sustaining global dancers for so many years now, and we're all traveling and we're all performing, just imagine if we had had a larger corpus of this cosmopolitan sadr, right? Which is what people like me have been, now I've given my life to understand that I am a citizen of the world. I'm no more restricted by my language, by my identity, by my culture. My culture is every culture. My language is every language. My art is every art. So that's why I get very excited when I get to talk to friends of other dance forms, right? Whether it be Kathak or Odissi, because the stance, and you would be happy to know, the Natya Rambha that we have today of Bharatanatyam, which is a long stretched hand, was not how it was until even maybe early 18th century. It was Chaturashra, which is today Chauka in Odissi, and which is today the Bada Chowk and the Chota Chowk in what is that, Chau, and it's still held like this in Yakshagana. It's still reconstructed like this in Vilasini Natyam. I still hold it like this in Sadar. Bharatanatyam, though, has moved here. Right? I'm just giving you an example. Right? So Sadar, of course, contains margams, it has the varnams, it has the padams, javalis, alaripu, jatiswarams, all of that. But it also, and these are the other two segments are all obscured, thanks to my gurus and their generosity and what little I've been able to research and learn. I've been able to reconstruct and learn some of these pieces, the Parsi tunes, the Hindustani tunes, and the Hindustani songs, and the Gujarati lyrics to which Devadasi's, the dancing humans, performed, right? And the Hindustani Natyam to which they performed, the thumris that were performed by Sadar artists, the khayals that were performed by the Sadar artist, here in Tamil Nadu, here in Triplicane, right? So we are not talking about cultures that are far removed from each other. It did not take only a Gohar Jan to come and for the first time introduce Thumri for us. We had 380 families of Kanchanis who were living here, many of whom had migrated from the courts of Wazid Ali Shah and many others from Lucknow and elsewhere. Right, so it was a thriving culture. Even today, we have the Sufidhar street where several musicians belonging to the yesteryear Thawaif traditions of the south of Tamil Nadu still live here. There are similar colonies in Tanjore, similar colonies in Ramanathapuram, and our own Tamil Sadar artists would perform Thumris and would perform Gujarati and I mean, they won't even know that they are singing. They would only call it Vadakathiya Sangeetam, which in Tamil literally means North Indian, right? Because for them, it's anything that is not Tamil is Vadakat, right? It has to be either Tamil or Telugu. But that is the indigenous way in which they were able to be a cosmopolitan artist, right? I just want to show you a photograph of two of my. Before I move here, let me travel back here. I mean, just to give you an example. Now, this has become a global example. 2 years ago, interestingly, on I think a day not too far, I think tomorrow, this day 2 years ago, I was in the UK and I performed for the Academy for their 40th anniversary. I'm here for everybody's 40th. I'm very excited. And I performed now an immortal piece. Wherever I go, people ask me. It's a Javali, which is written by Karur Shivaramaya, a Telugu poet from the Tamil country. in the late 18th century, and he wrote it in Telugu, and he was patronized by a Dubash, who was, of course, patronized by a British officer, General Piggott. So I think the Padam, the Javali, has caught on now the world's imagination. It is called "Oh My Lovely Lalana." Oh my, I'm not dancing, I'm not showing you the video clip too long, so I'll just share 2 lines you might enjoy. Oh my lovely Lalana, in beautiful Karahara Priya. Yelane pomanti. Oh my lovely Lalana, where are you going? Ittuvanti step. Is it fit to take? Sit a while, dear. Let me convince you, oh, my lovely Lalana. So, I mean, this is only a mere example of how cultures were meeting so effortlessly. And these were some of the dancing humans whose grandmothers and whose mothers and who are themselves artists who carried this art in their bodies, in their memories, in their hands, in their legs, in their sweat and blood. And I was very fortunate to learn these are the Kalyani granddaughters, Kalyani great granddaughters, the Tiruvalappattur Kalyani great granddaughters. And this is their mother and sister, Jivamma and Kasturi Amma, Jivaratnamma and Rajalakshmi Amma. There, see, now you see the Indian notch, right? So this was taken in a tent in sometime in Tamil Nadu, 1933, sorry, right? 1933. These were the 2 women who performed for Rukmini Devi to be enamored with dance, and that's the story, right? So I'm going to end today's presentation with the voice and dance of one of the last surviving dancing humans of the community of a Devadasi, who's a proud Devadasi, my guru, Vralimalai Muthukannammalamma. She's phenomenal. I'm just going to show you a short clip of her dancing, and then we'll end there and then take some questions if there are.
Natta, dimita, danata, dimita, ta te ya, ta te ya, ta te ya, ta te ya, di ta te ya, di diva,
Right. I'm going to end with that. She's 80 plus. Touch wood. She was dancing when she was 80. Now this was taken only just a few months ago. So Amma has been teaching me for many years. So it's the combination of understanding text, combination of understanding history, being able to visualize art as a shifting, moving, constantly malleable, very adaptive rolling stone, and the ability to see it not in its transformation, but in the present, as I said, in the moment, on the bodies, voices, lives, photographs, memories of the dancing humans to whom we have access, who are the Devadasis, right? What little records we have of them, and who few are left with us. Their memories have largely helped in understanding that the art that we have imbibed as Bharatanatyam in this modern form, in this sort of mainstream form, is only but a sliver. So when I made an effort way back in 2008 to start studying these forms, and then, when I finished my doctoral dissertation and I started performing from the attic, people thought I was doing something from the past. This othering is such an easy thing for us to do, right? Oh, this is mainstream. We're all mainstream Bharatanatyam dancers. This is the other. This is exotic. This is the other. But I just would like to submit, and I do this all the time, whatever we are performing is only one sliver, and this long tradition is connecting us to so many more people, so many more cultures, bringing together so many more knowledges, so much more of camaraderie between artists. So why not? Why other it? Why discriminate and call it the past? So for me, past to future is embedded not just in the pages of some text or in the walls of some temples or in some record in some government office or even in the British office in the UK, but it is the past is embedded in the present, in our bodies. So for me to dance Sadir today, for me to acknowledge to myself that I am this vessel into which this art has been poured, but I'm not a thick bottom vessel. I should be like a tube. I should allow it to pass on, and it only passes through me, not from me, right? This understanding allows for this art to continue to roll, failing which it will remain and stagnate and become a rock. We don't want a rock, we want a rolling stone. They're always cooler. I'll end there and I'll let you take some questions. Thank you.
Okay, Swarnamalya, thank you so much for an absolutely amazing, informative talk. Thank you so much, because I think with doing these seminars, we learn so much more. And I love that you're talking about diversity and inclusion, because, really, you are a vessel. And I love what you've just said at the end in terms of, we want it to be a rolling stone so that we can keep incorporating more and more into it and sort of like become more inclusive rather than exclusive. So thank you so much. And I'm sure everybody will agree with what I'm saying. It's been a really informative talk. So we've had a few questions coming in. So we've had one from Sai Shruti. She's asking, was Gondali an art form from Maharashtra?
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, right? So Gondhala is the double-headed instrument that you saw playing right behind me. And yes, Gondhali does have a Marathi influence, but you'd be happy and surprised to know that it did not travel to the south only with the Marathas. The Maratha is the south. Let us first remember that, right? So Maharashtra was the south, was Dakshina for a very, very, very long time. Right today, because they speak a lot of Hindi, and they are considered the Hindi belt. So this was part of the Deccani, right? Deccani culture, and Maratha people and Marathi culture was very much part of the like I said, the migration when Muhammad bin Tughlaq tried to shift his capital from Delhi all the way to Aurangabad, and when he fled after a few years because he couldn't manage to accomplish that shift very well, he left behind a large community, and this community proliferated down south and moved everywhere. So right from the medieval centuries, we've had a lot of Marathi influence. That, of course, became a huge profusion during the Maratha period. So all this to say that the Gondhala as an instrument and Gondhali as a tradition started thriving in the Tamil country much earlier. For example, in Tanjavur, even today, and these are the last two Gondhala players from that tradition whom I worked with for the last 12 years. There is a Gondhala Karavidi, which had over 380 Gondhala families, traditional artists of the Gondhala family. So it's not entirely new for us. So it's not as if, just because a Maratha king came, he just plucked them out of their country and brought them here. So it was a slow migration. It was an evolution. But yes, it is Marathi in its culture. So you see, we have Marathi as well.
And that's actually very interesting, because actually a lot of us, when we think of Marathi, we think of traditional, people from Mumbai, which then comes under Gujarat. So we don't really think of Marathi people being from the south. So, again, it's so interesting to learn all of this.
I also want to add that Gujarat was not far away from us either. I also reconstructed a form called Gurjari. We have the Gurjara Raga, of course, but Gurjari as a form was also part. So it had a lot. So, again, the distinction between folk and classical, all of these lines start to blur for us. And so the classical really becomes this huge ocean into which all of these just can be reimagined by us. So Gujarat was not very far away from us either. Surat, in fact, was very much part of this coast, even for trade.
See, and that's again is so interesting, and I love the fact that actually, you know, it doesn't matter where in India or which part of India you come from, wherever you're living in the world. The fact is, we are all united by dance. Whether it's Bharatanatyam, whether it's Kathak, whether it's Kuchipudi, whether it's even hip hop, you know, we're all linked by dance, and it's a universal language. So we've got. So we've had a few comments. So Hit the Mystery said, such a diverse and embracing art it was, and that, you know, he's saying that it was goodness me that politics does to art. He says that, yeah, that so that there needs to be an international Sadhir Day to celebrate this diversity within the art. It's just wow. And I think then, you know, this is what CICD are actually doing with the 40th anniversary celebrations, is we're trying to ensure that we bring all dance forms together under one umbrella, because irrespective of, you know, the mudras you do or the, you know, the different poses, we all still come from the same culture. We just have slightly different variations in language, slightly different variation in skin tone, height, size, but that's the human, that's the human race overall. So question is, well, you've answered that in terms of we've had thank you, that was brilliant, amazing, wow, that was so informative and interesting, thank you, they're saying, from Talisha.
I think there's someone, Hidden Mystery, who says that he's left a question there for us somewhere.
Yeah, I'm just going. So I'm working my way down.
Right.
Right. So the question. So there's one that's come from Rakshita. She goes, I have heard of one more art form by the name Brengani. Is it similar to Pirani? And can you let us know some information on the region of origin?
Right. So Prenkhana was a form that was, so Prenkhana is mentioned all the way from Abhinava Bharati's time. So Abhinava Gupta starts talking about, so by this time what happens is, you know, we must understand that the written texts are our only window today to understanding when an art form thrived. So when you see a text typically, say in the 10th or 12th century, we immediately think that the art form belongs to that century. We think that the text must have been written about something that must have long been there and part of that community and their life and lifestyle for a very long time, right? Today, we are all documenting art forms that have been there for very long, right? We are still continuing to, and we're still unable to do it in entirety. So when Abhinava Bharati mentions Prenkhana, we must understand that it must have already been there in circulation. And he talks about different forms of theatrical. So how did theater like sort of disintegrate, and you know, where did these dance forms evolve from? They did not just come from theatrical traditions. They also came from regional, like I said, the Viraliyars and the Panars and the Devadasis who were performing and all of that, right? So Prenkhana was identified as one of the Uparupakas. But Perani, though, is a much later form. You find the name Perani, and by that time you also have Prenkhana as another form. So these are not the same. Prenkhana is, so you can't really pinpoint an origin. You can't say, oh, Abhinava Gupta was from this region and therefore, right? So it would be very foolhardy for us to make those assumptions. Similarly, Natyashastra can't be tied to just Kashmir only because we believe Bharata belonged there, right? Because he's documented so many forms. And the fact that all of these cultures met like a melting pot in the place that he must have written this, right, goes to show how multicultural our land was, right? The whole world was really at that point, right, in many ways, right? So one can't really point to where Prenkhana was, but one can say that Prenkhana was a Uparupaka and was perhaps performed both in the I call it north for easier understanding, the northern regions, as well as all the way in Karnataka. We see it in Karnataka, we see it in Andhra Pradesh. These are all mentioned in treatises. We have no physical evidence of this dance anywhere yet, unless it's been reconstructed by someone like me.
which, you know, hopefully, well, maybe it has, and maybe we'll be able to bring, you know, if they have done that, maybe we'll be able to bring them on board for one of our seminars. So yeah, Hidden has asked the question saying, amazing research and thank you for sharing. I want to know why you are doing this work.
Aha, good question, right? So I started learning at the age of 3 from KJ Sarasamma, who comes from the hereditary community. Although I don't belong to the community, uh, by the time I was 18, I was singing, dancing, without realizing that I had not learned the art form from an institution, but from a person who comes, as I told you, this dancing human, right? Who was refusing to share her story, right? Because again, we're not going into the socio-political reasons behind the Devadasi and her sort of relegation to the background. But so she had her reservation. That piqued my interest. And my innate interest in academia and research combined, I think, dragged me down that road. And I must tell you, it was the holy grail that pushed me in that direction. I thought, oh, I'm going to decode, Chola period, and I'm going to sort of talk to people about how 9th, 10th century dance was. And bam, after 2 years of research, I realized that it's a no-go. And so I have to roll back through these vestibules in order for me to sort of go back. So I systematically went period. I call it reverse engineering. So I went from what I knew, which was Bharatanatyam or Sadar actually. I learned it as Sadar all the time. So from that, I rolled backwards. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Thank you. And then he's also said one can look at your work and make an assumption that perhaps you are truly to redo what history has endowed on the fate of Sadir, which I think is really cool, by the way. But do you ever face any opposition in your endeavors?
Oh, yeah, all the time, right? See, these oppositions are thankfully, though, unfortunately for the opponent, is not something that they can voice very strongly as objectionable, because I come with a lot of academic and sort of evidence-based backing. I don't just speak off of my like hat. I think a lot about it. I bring evidence. It's academic work, so it's research. But because I'm primarily a dancer, everything I do is embodied, right? So unless I can physically feel it, unless the present, the now, like I said, the today's body can embody it, nothing makes sense to me. So I am also writing about it, but I'm also prolifically dancing about it, which makes their job very tough. But they try, they're all the time trying. But it really allows me to start thinking, if this is making someone that uncomfortable, what needle are we shifting and in which direction, right? What does it mean to bring a Gondhala player who's otherwise considered folk, right, on the Music Academy stage? What does it mean to tell the world of Bharatanatyam, hey, there is Persian and Islamic influence in your art. You're not pristine Hindu art. You're not pristine South Indian. There is Hindi, there is Tumri, there is Khayal, there is all of that. How about that? So when I say that, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and it excites me to make them uncomfortable because I know we're doing something right.
Well, I love that you've said that, Swarnamalya, because I think having sort of like a thought disruptor, and especially a thought disruptor in the art world, which can be very geeky, it can be very snobby to a certain extent. So to actually have somebody like you coming in and saying, I respect the history, I respect what the scriptures are telling me and what the temple sculptures are telling me, but I'm going to disrupt the thought process and actually bring in another theory into this. So that is amazing. So we've got a few more questions on the chat section. So there was one that was, just bear with me. It was, it's a question that is saying, where do you perform your historically researched art forms? Who, you know, what audiences do you perform to?
All of it. I perform it everywhere. So I don't say I'm a Bharatanatyam dancer anymore. My students call themselves Sadar artists. We're all Sadar artists, all with the stamp and approval and continuous guidance of my gurus, the Sadar artists, some of whom you just saw on photograph and film now. So they hold our hand. But I'm also doing work by expanding the scope of that Sadar itself, as you see, right? Because Jakkini and Perani are all not in their memory at all, right? They're all only 70, 80 years old. So it's also obscured from their memory. Though but they are able to better relate to it because that's closer to their assimilation of the art than, you know, this modern day sort of angularized Bharatanatyam, right? So they're able to really relate to it. So this entire process, my researched work is, so I dance it under very many different titles, platforms. One is called From the Attic, which is this large extensive platform. It's a mini exhibition, traveling exhibition. It's a lecture series. It's also a performance series where on different evenings I do different performances. One day it's Perani, another day it's Jakkini, so on and so forth. Then there is Sadar, of course, wherever we perform, it's Sadar. So I'm constantly talking, my students are talking. So it's really everywhere. There is nothing. So like I said, there is no other, right? So it's not as if I'm doing Bharatanatyam in the morning and I'm moonlighting as a Sadar art. This is it. This is it, right? And you transform, you become this global citizen, you become this universal dancer, you're willing to become this rolling stone. And that's it. That's your identity.
Which is amazing, and I think a lot of us that are sort of, you know, obviously Indian by culture, but haven't grown up in India, and you know, so for us it is very much like we are global citizens with an Indian heritage behind us. So we've had, and this is a really interesting question. So this is from Sai. Sai, thank you for this question. It's an amazing question. So she said, I have sometimes wondered why men composed about how women felt in most of the Srigara poems, based Varnams, and also in a few Javelis. So is it like women composers were not recognized?
So Harshita Kamath has written about it. So have I. Actually, my articles are out there if you're interested. So my opinion is two-pronged. We lived and we continue to live, and the entire edifice of artistry and art is built on patriarchy. So there's no escaping that, right? So in that sort of structure, you are right. For example, Muddu Palani was a wonderful composer of Sringara Kavya, Radhika Santvanamo. Right? Today, Muddu Palani is this exotic woman poetess who will be invoked every now and then for an article, you know, where they want to just pinpoint that there was one Sringara writer. Right? So yes, so it was far and few in our understanding. So the present cannot see the past because we are still very patriarchal. But the other truth is also, and Harshita writes very beautifully about it, and I sort of quote her and I added to her research about how perhaps Kshetraya Padams, Kshetraya is one of the most well-known prolific composers of Sringara Padams, was in fact not a man, but several Devadasis whose compilation of Padams, for the lack of credibility, because it could not be published or be well known in the name of these women, dancing women, could have perhaps taken the name of an imaginary Kshetraya, or the one who travels across. So this is Harshita's research. I substantiate it, but I also question it, right? Because there are, both of these could be true and not true. But one thing is for sure, we had a lot of women composers. There are several. And agency is not just in composing. Let's also remember that, right? The agency is in being able to own that composition and embody it. So these composers were writing for these embodied practitioners. So let's remember that agency was shared, although we continue to live in a patriarchal world where that agency is still skewed in its power structure. So we're not very far from our ancestral women, but their agency was slightly better, I would say, than us, because they were embodying something that was written for them.
Which is, and the thing is, you know, this is where sort of like, and I'll get back to the questions. We've got quite a few comments coming in based on this, which is amazing. You know, they do say that Shakespeare took up the man's name, but actually it was a woman that was writing, because of the level of detail he went into with like the love and the emotions. So there is, you know, there are rumors there that actually Shakespeare was a woman writing under a pseudo. So right, so Sai's continued saying, when it comes to performing Javelis today, I love its rich musical quality and fluidity, but when looking at it from today's lens, do they portray women as submissive ones? And as artists, should we be meticulous while performing, as it might glorify infidelity and women being submissive.
Mhm.
I have sometimes wondered why men composed about how women felt in most Shrigara Bhavan based Varnams and also in a few Javalis. So yeah, I mean, that was sort of like the very interesting thing. I think you've answered that. Looking
No, I
at,
mean, if I can just add a sentence about this
please.
whole question of again, it comes back to this question of our understanding of that society and context, right? So this idea of agency is very different for us. We must remember that we are 21st century, so the idea of agency was very different. If we were to go back and look at these pieces as belonging to an era where there were so many women from this community particularly who had a lot more sort of buying power within their spaces, right? I mean, I can't go into details for the lack of time, but there was a lot that they were able to do. Not to say that it was not an exploitative system, not to say that, you know, they were not subjugated, they were not exploited. Yes, but so were our grandmothers. Right. So were our, I mean, when I say our, I mean anybody else outside of that hereditary community, right? So this idea of emancipation, the idea of new age, avant-garde, feminism, even feminism has gone through so many loops in the last several decades, right? So which feminism are you pegging your idea of agency in order to examine these compositions? I think that's crucial.
Well, I think based on this, I think it would be a great idea for us to do a separate seminar talking about the actual role of feminism within Indian classical dance. And I think that's what, you know, we'll speak about that off screen. So I'm going to go through a few more questions and then we are going to have to bring this to a close. So it's saying dance is predominantly, so this is from Rakshita, dance is predominantly considered only as a movement skill, and this sort of collateral knowledge and literary wisdom is not recognized with general audiences. How do we encapsulate such information into learning and incorporate for early learners as instructors and trainers?
Oh, that's a profound question indeed. One that keeps me awake at night every day. So I think, you know, I might sound a bit cliche when I say this, but I think the way my gurus who are not literate in the sense, you know, of this English education, somehow were able to allow us to imbibe um, and and seed a spirit of inquiry in us, which is very key, right? So if we're able to do that, if we don't present the story as the beginning, middle, and end in entirety. And what I mean by story here is everything from practice to pedagogy to tradition to roots to performance. If we don't present it as the entirety, right? If we tell them that there are more dots that we cannot connect, and that it's a complex history of which you are a part, and you must feel very excited that, you know, you can search for something all the time and you'll still be finding it, right? I think that spirit of inquiry, if we're able to seed in dancers, whether they are young or older, I think it also puts them in a non-complacent place, right? So which is also, you know, helpful for gurus, because, you know, we always think, you know, the dancers somehow one day wake up and think they've learned it all, right? You can't learn it all because your body is in the present, right? So all of these, I think the basis of all of this is perhaps that spirit of inquiry, and perhaps how we can tell them that the story is not full and finished.
Yeah. It's consistently evolving, very much like humankind. We are always forever evolving. So in terms of your articles, I mean, the question is, you know, would you be happy to share where people can read your articles? Because there's a lot of interest around that. And we've had another question: in what century was dance? What was dance and drama mixed together? What kind of dance was it, sort of like, that then later developed into regional styles?
Drama and dance are wedded together in many ways. It's not as if it was there once upon a time and then it got divorced. So, you know, you see from Sanskritic traditions, you see, like I said, the Rupakas all the way. You understand that they were they were there from the Natya Shastra, from Dasharupaka, from whatever other texts like, Sangeeta Ratnakara, so on and so forth. But you also consistently see through regional texts and regional understandings. All you have to do is step into, the Indian streets, villages, and you will see at every street corner a street nautanki or a theatrical form, which incorporates art, which incorporates our pedagogy, which incorporates several of the strands of dramaturgy and pedagogy that have been documented in one or the other text of the past. Right, so it's impossible to make that distinction. It's still there. Terukut is very deeply wedded to Sadar. How is a research? Somebody has to invest their time, right? But one can very easily and very evocatively say that they are wedded together. So theater is not very separated from the art, and regional styles, so I also don't believe that Marga gave birth to Deshi. There is a Marga and there's a Deshi. I'll just give you one example and I'll let you think about it, right? There are many inroads, like, you have a home somewhere, in the suburbs, in the countryside, and you have all of these roads, little lanes that lead to your house. One fine day, a bunch of you who live near each other decide that you want the government to lay, to roll out a main road, a highway, whatever, like a speedway, whatever it's called in your part of the world, right? You ask for it, right? So then this main road is constructed, right? These side roads allow for people and habitation to understand that there is a need for this codification. There is a need for this general path, a path that will, so when you tell people, hey, say, take the highway and then, take right, and then you'll reach my house. That doesn't mean that your house came after the highway, right? So my idea of Margi and Deshi is, yes, there's Margi and Deshi, but Deshi led into Margi rather than the other way.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the explanation. Right, so we're going to take one more. So it's just one question from Shakti. She said, one question, this is a brilliant question as well. So have there been any transgender performing dances earlier mentioned? So is there any history of transgender people actually performing within temples or the art forms?
Of course, the idea of embracing people other than the two genders has been part. I mean, this cosmopolitan, diverse community, how did we imagine that they wouldn't, embrace people with all kinds of diversity, right? So we have tremendous, documentation of different people who have performed, who are artists, but also who have contributed to the tradition itself, right? Even in Silapadigaram, you have the Pedi Adal, and then you have later on, there are several, like the court artists, the temple artists. So there are copious examples to tell us that all genders were part of this artistry.
And that's beautiful, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things about sort of like the history of the Indian culture, irrespective of like which region you come from. I think we've got such a rich, diverse history and an inclusive history. And I think maybe is sort of like, I think when colonialism came in and we were invaded by various different countries, they tried to take that inclusion away from us. And so sometimes where there isn't inclusion within India, it is because as a result of the echoes of colonialism. But as a whole, we embraced this centuries before it became trendy. So thank you. I mean, actually, then you just sort of just said that. So are you aware of any wider LGBTQ narratives within the Sadhir world? And I think that would be a whole other conversation. But if you
that's a whole other conversation. But just quickly to say that Sadhir world, when I say Sadhir world, today we are left with just a few of the practitioners, but their family members, artists who are not just dancers, but also musicians and instrumentalists who have embraced their identities are definitely part of the community still.
That's amazing. Swarnamalya, thank you so much for such an amazing talk, so informative. And I honestly, all of the talks have been amazing, but I think I could talk to you for hours on this. And I'd love to, I think CICD would love to have maybe another seminar where we talk about, maybe women within the art form, and let's talk about transgender and the LGBTQ community within, within sort of Indian classical dance. So just to say thank you so much. I'm going to ask Lily to come on shortly, but before I do, just want to say again, thank you so much for this, and thank you to Nilima Devi and Talisha, who has been, who's working behind the scenes to make sure that all of this, all the Zoom meeting and everything runs very, very smoothly, and also to the board members of CICD. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to be doing these seminars. So thank you, and thank you, Didi, for bringing such an amazing group of artists together to help spread the awareness and education. So I'm going to just hand over to Didi for a short while, and then Swarnamalya, I'd like to invite you just to say a few last words, and then we will close the session for the day. So I'll ask Didi to come on, and I will mute myself.
I'll just speak very briefly because I think we are running out of time, but what a wonderful insight into your research, Swarnamalya. I do not, nowadays the books do not provide this kind of information. So I think we really need somebody like you to write more books on this kind of your wonderful research, because otherwise we wouldn't know. It's wonderful that as part of 40th anniversary, we decided to do online seminar like this, which is really educating not me, but everybody, of course. And to find out about this Hindustani Natya, means I can't go into details what you say because something has gone even about, I made a lot of notes, but the way you have done research and the influence of North India into South India is also amazing. Means I thought only South India always remained very pure and it is only South Indian, there was no influence, only North Indian has got this other influence like Muslim and Persians and all that, but no, South India has also got that influence. So that is very much educational for me. And I would like to really know Hindustani Natyam. I'm very much keen on that because maybe, I don't know whether we can do something in Kathak there, Hindustani Natyam. So thank you so much for your wonderful research work. And I think the way you are very inspirational, and I hope a lot of young people can take inspiration from you to carry on this kind of research because I'm sure there are a lot of areas people can develop from your expertise. And I wish something from Kathak in North India also, this kind of work is happening. I don't know, I do not know many people, but I hope people are connecting with Shastras. I know something is happening in Pune, somebody who did, Roshan Datte, who did something on Karnas in Kathak, visiting North Indian temples and connecting with Natya Shastra. So that is only that one example, but I think we would like to see more of such things. What in South India is happening in what you are doing, scholarly person like you, So thank you so much. This is a very rich insight into this today's presentation of your past, present, future of the Devadasi tradition, and it has got such a wonderful cultural influences. As you said, it's a multicultural pool, to sort of understand and combine and the way you have said Rolling Stone, I think that really, I like that it's not it's connecting with everything all the time, past, present, and future. So thank you, many thanks, and I hope we can meet up again. We will have to plan for next year, and let us see we can do more of such things, where we can educate our young people, especially who are going to carry it.
Thank you, Didi. Thank you for your kind words.
Thank you, Nidhi, for your wonderful being a host, excellent host. And thank you, Talisha, for administering the whole thing. So thank you all the board members as well. And I think we finish here with Namaskar.
So I just thank you, Didi. Thank you for your kind words. And Swarnamalya, have you got any last words to share with us all?
Absolutely. I first want to begin by sharing with Nilima ji that I do perform Hindustani Natyam, and I actually performed it last 2 years ago in the UK when I came there. I did it as part of the program that I presented there in London and Cambridge. And people are always very fascinated when we bring the thumris and we bring the repertoire that is not usually imagined as part of Bharatanatyam or Sadir, right?
Exactly.
So I would love to share some of that with you whenever we can. But I
What a
want
shame. I miss you. I think 2 years back when you came, I must have missed you because it didn't
let's
click.
hope that the world allows us to meet soon in person.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
No, but I want to say that I think what I spoke today, even though I didn't originally plan it like that, but it's such a beautiful coincidence that you are the Rolling Stone. You know, you are the one who has traveled as this cosmopolitan universal being who's moved, like I said, from India, to the UK, and has established yourself and created an umbrella really for so many artists and art lovers and art forms to thrive. So even though I haven't met you in person, I've taken so much admiration for what you're doing here. Thank you very much for having me. It's such a momentous occasion of your 40 years. It's not a small feat. My institution has only stepped into its 17th year, so it's a baby, but I know what 40 years will take, the demands. So many, many congratulations and hearty prayers for 40 more years of glorious success for you and the institution. Thank you so much for having me, Neelimaji.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Rich,
Thank
wonderful
you.
research work. Yeah.
It was an honor to be here, and I want to thank Nidhi, who's been such a patient and a beautiful, generous host,
Yeah.
and
Definitely.
your student Alicia, who's been lovely with me in coordinating all of. I want to thank everybody at CICD and our lovely audience for asking beautiful questions.
Yes, definitely.
They have. I mean, I've got to say, I mean, this, again. So thank you so much. You've educated us so much, Lily. Thank you. And to say to the attendees, thank you so much for joining us, because we wouldn't be able to do these seminars without you attending and for your interaction, which really does help us shape. Now, we are coming to the end of today's seminar, so thank you both, for being such amazing pioneers. And also, just to say to all the attendees, you will receive an email from us with a short questionnaire. If you could please fill that in for us, it allows us then to create more seminars like this. So on that note, I just want to say thank you, Swarnamalya, again. Thank you so much. Thank you, Didi, the board, and Felicia, and thank you, the audience, for watching. So have a good evening, good afternoon, or a good day if your day is just starting. And we hope to see you all next week at the last seminar. Thank you.
Thank you.